The disappearance that shook the congregation. It was a crisp Thursday evening in early October when Angela Woods vanished from the face of the earth. Knoxville, Tennessee, nestled in the foothills of the Great Smoky Mountains, was used to the occasional scandal. A teenager caught shoplifting, a high school coach fired for misconduct, but this was different. This was terrifying. Angela was 37 years old, the kind of woman who didn't just show up to church every Sunday. She ran the bake sale, led the prayer chain, and was often the first to volunteer when someone needed a meal or a ride. A mother of two and married to her high school sweetheart, Brian Woods, Angela's disappearance was completely out of character. She was last seen leaving Shepherd's Grace Church around 9:30 p.m. on October 12th, following a late-night Bible study group. The church was small, just 120 members on the roster, but tightly knit. When Angela didn't return home that night, her husband initially assumed she'd gone to comfort a grieving friend or perhaps had car trouble. But when she still hadn't answered her phone or come home by morning, he knew something was terribly wrong. Brian reported her missing at 6:43 a.m. the next day. "She was like family to everyone. She wasn't just my wife," Brian told reporters, tears pooling in his tired eyes. "She was the heart of this community." Angela's disappearance sent ripples through the town. By noon, dozens of people were combing the wooded areas behind the church. Flyers were printed, social media posts shared. The sheriff's office deployed search and rescue dogs. Helicopters buzzed overhead. At the center of the growing media storm stood Pastor Gregory Miles, the church's silver-haired, velvet-voiced spiritual leader. He had presided over the congregation for 12 years, growing the small sanctuary from a modest circle of aging believers into a vibrant, family-friendly house of worship. He baptized Angela's children. He performed her sister's wedding. He was her counselor, her friend, and, unknown to nearly everyone, something far more. Standing before a packed congregation just 2 days after Angela disappeared, Pastor Miles delivered a somber, tear-filled sermon. "She is a woman of deep faith," he said, "and wherever she is, God is with her. Let us pray for her safe return. Let us not succumb to fear or doubt." But behind closed doors, police were already asking hard questions about his relationship with Angela, his actions the night she disappeared, and some unusual inconsistencies in his story. The timeline that didn't add up. Pastor Miles told detectives he left the church around 9:15 p.m. after helping Angela lock up. He said she was alone when he left, planning to spend a few quiet moments in the sanctuary before heading home. But according to Angela's friend Rebecca Ellis, Angela had texted her at 9:27 p.m. saying, "Still here. He wants to talk again." Police quietly subpoenaed cell phone records. What they found raised alarms. Over 2,000 text messages exchanged between Angela and Pastor Miles in just the past 3 months. Some were spiritual in tone. Others were far more personal, late-night messages, conversations about loneliness, marriage, and secrets we can't tell anyone. But there was no hard proof of an affair. Not yet. Then came a break at 5:42 p.m. The day after Angela's disappearance, a farmer spotted a burned-out SUV in a grassy field near the edge of Knox County. The vehicle was registered to Angela. The tires were charred, the windows blackened. Inside, police found her purse, her keys, but no sign of her. Blood traces were later identified on the driver's seat, though not enough to determine a fatal injury. Still, something terrible had clearly happened. The car had been torched deliberately, likely to destroy evidence. But who would do such a thing? An uneasy vigil that Saturday, the congregation gathered for a candlelight vigil on the church lawn. Angela's children clutched stuffed animals. Her husband stood like a statue beside Pastor Miles, who again led prayers and scripture readings for her safe return. "We will not let evil win," he declared, voice trembling. But several in the crowd had already begun to whisper. Why hadn't he mentioned Angela's name more directly? Why was his tone so rehearsed? Rebecca, the same friend who'd received Angela's final text, told police she had confronted Miles weeks earlier about his closeness to Angela. "He got defensive," she said. "Told me I was being paranoid. But something about the way he looked at her, it wasn't pastoral. It was possessive." The whispers grew louder when investigators learned the church's security system hadn't been working for weeks due to a software issue Pastor Miles said he'd been meaning to fix. But then came the most disturbing moment of all. The anonymous tip. It arrived in the form of a typed letter, postmarked from Knoxville, addressed to the local sheriff. "You won't find her where you're looking," the letter read. "You should check the floorboards beneath the storage closet at Shepherd's Grace. She never left that church." The sheriff immediately called a judge and secured a warrant. The following morning, a full forensics team entered the church. Under the cover of darkness, detectives moved quickly and quietly, not wanting to alarm the public or tip off anyone who might have been involved. In the storage room, wedged between old communion trays and Christmas decorations, was a sealed panel in the floor. It had recently been painted over. Beneath it, a narrow crawl space, and beneath that, what officers described only as evidence of a violent crime. They wouldn't say more publicly yet, not until the lab confirmed what they already suspected. But inside that crawl space, they found blood spatter, a torn piece of blouse fabric, and strands of long blonde hair. Angela's DNA matched all three. Pastor Miles was brought in for formal questioning, but he denied everything. "I don't know what happened to Angela," he said, "but I know I didn't hurt her." He claimed the tip was sent by someone trying to destroy his reputation, someone who hated the church or maybe had a grudge against him personally. But when detectives asked for an alibi for the night of October 12th, his answer was vague at best. "I went home. I was alone. My wife was visiting her sister in Nashville." No one could verify his whereabouts for the 4 hours after Angela was last seen. A community-torn news spread fast. The congregation fractured. Some said the devil was targeting a man of God. Others said the devil was already behind the pulpit. "She was in love with him," one member whispered. "You could see it in the way she looked at him. But he was using her," another added. "He always had too much power." Angela's children remained silent, too young to fully grasp the storm unfolding around them. Her husband refused interviews. The search for Angela's body intensified. Drones scanned the hills. Cadaver dogs were deployed across every property Miles had access to. Forensics teams returned to the church for further evidence. And Pastor Miles, he returned to the pulpit the following Sunday. "Even in the valley of the shadow of death," he said, voice calm, "we fear no evil." But behind the scenes, a detective was staring at a new surveillance video obtained just hours earlier, footage from a gas station a mile from the church, timestamped at 10:16 p.m. on October 12th. It showed a man matching Pastor Miles's description. He was wearing gloves and buying lighter fluid. The church's dark secret. The surveillance footage was damning. On the screen, a man with silver gray hair, heavy, black-rimmed glasses, and a collared shirt walked into a dimly lit gas station just after 10:16 p.m. on the night Angela Woods vanished. He moved like he was in a hurry, checking over his shoulder twice, and paid cash for a pack of matches, a pair of gloves, and a bottle of lighter fluid. The store clerk remembered him because he bought them without saying a word. The security camera captured the entire transaction. And even though the man wore a mask pulled under his chin, hardly unusual in a post-pandemic world, facial recognition software later confirmed what detectives already suspected. The man was Pastor Gregory Miles. When confronted with the footage during a second police interview, Pastor Miles didn't blink. "I do yard work late sometimes," he said coolly. "I keep gloves and lighter fluid on hand for the fire pit behind the church. The matches were for a devotional event I'd planned the next day. But the problem was, there was no fire pit behind the church, and there was no devotional event scheduled either. Worse still, his alibi was unraveling fast. The storage closet and the crawl space 2 days after discovering blood and hair beneath the church's storage closet, forensic teams returned to Shepherd's Grace with cadaver dogs and ground-penetrating radar. The crawl space had been sealed, painted, and insulated with foam filler, an attempt, it appeared, to block the stench of decomposition. But Angela's body still hadn't been found. But now, they had more than a disappearance. They had a crime scene. A judge granted a full search warrant for the church property, including Pastor Miles's office and personal belongings. Inside the pastor's desk drawer, investigators discovered a folder labeled Confessions. It was filled not with written sins of others, but love letters. Dozens of them, all from Angela. Most were undated, but the tone shifted over time, from admiration and flattery to jealousy, insecurity, and fear. The last letter simply read, "I know what you're capable of. If something happens to me, it's on you." Then came the discovery that sent the investigation into overdrive. The secret phone buried beneath a stack of old church newsletters in Pastor Miles's filing cabinet was a prepaid burner phone. Investigators powered it up and quickly realized it had been used exclusively for communication between Miles and Angela. The messages were encrypted using an app called Discreet Talk. Within minutes, the digital forensics team unearthed chilling evidence. Dozens of explicit messages detailing their affair, voicemails in which Angela sobs, accusing him of manipulating. Heard out a final, heartbreaking audio recording. "You said God forgave you, but this isn't forgiveness. This is control. If you don't stop, I will tell everyone." That voicemail was timestamped just 3 hours before she vanished. When shown this evidence, Miles remained stone-faced. He refused to comment. His attorney, publicly, insisted the relationship was purely pastoral and that the entire case was built on coincidence and circumstantial paranoia. But the court of public opinion had already begun to shift. The Congregation Fracture Sunday service at Shepherd's Grace was a shadow of its former self. Only 14 people attended, down from nearly 90 the week before. Half of them walked out. Mid-sermon, outside, protesters gathered, holding signs that read "Justice for Angela" and "Sin in the Sanctuary." Among the protesters was Rebecca Ellis, Angela's closest friend, who told the media, "We warned her. We begged her to step away. But he made her believe she was the only one who could save him. That's how he got to her, through guilt and God." Local reporters began digging into Pastor Miles's past. They learned that in 2016, a former female parishioner at a church he'd led in Georgia filed a quiet complaint to the church board alleging inappropriate spiritual counseling. The report was dismissed internally. No police report was ever filed. The woman later left the church. Now, she was ready to talk that a pattern emerges. Her name was Rachel Hammond. She was 28 when she joined Miles's Georgia congregation. She'd recently gone through a divorce and had sought spiritual guidance. "He made me feel seen," she said. "He told me God sent me to him at the right time." She described private sessions, emotional manipulation, and a steady escalation of physical boundaries disguised as prayer rituals. "He told me I was broken and that he could fix me. That closeness was part of the process." Rachel said she eventually cut ties when she realized she wasn't the only woman he was counseling behind closed doors. Her interview aired locally and later nationally. Within days, 3 more women came forward with similar accounts. Each described a pattern: emotional dependency, spiritual gaslighting, and secret communications outside of church channels. None reported actual physical assault, but all admitted to being deeply manipulated. For investigators, this was crucial that it painted a picture of a man who weaponized his position of power to control and isolate women under the guise of religion. And now, one of those women was gone. Burn patterns and a forensic trail back at the field where Angela's SUV had been found. Fire marshals returned to re-examine the burned site. Their analysis revealed a slow, calculated ignition process, not the hasty work of a panicked killer. Traces of a chemical accelerant were found on the vehicle's carpet and steering wheel, consistent with the same brand of lighter fluid Pastor Miles had purchased. Further investigation revealed faint footprints around the vehicle. One matched the size and brand of boots Miles was known to wear. Then came the DNA confirmation. Blood found beneath the church matched Angela's. So did the hair strands. So did a partial fingerprint on a broken hymnal stand found in the crawl space. With all this mounting evidence, detectives prepared their next move: the arrest on a rainy Wednesday morning, just under 2 weeks after Angela's disappearance. Pastor Gregory Miles was arrested outside his home while walking his dog. He was charged with first-degree murder, abuse of a corpse, tampering with evidence, obstruction of justice. He pleaded not guilty at his arraignment. As news of the arrest spread, the town erupted. Supporters and protesters clashed outside the courthouse. Angela's family remained private, issuing only one brief statement: "We will not rest until her body is brought home and she receives the dignity she deserves." But inside the police department, a new twist was emerging. The confession they didn't expect just before midnight. An anonymous envelope was slid under the door of the sheriff's office. Inside was a single, handwritten note. "I helped him. I didn't know he was going to kill her. He said she was dangerous. that she would destroy the ministry. I just helped clean up. The note was signed only, "You know who I am." And it ended with one final line: "Check the abandoned campground off Route 27. Detectives immediately mobilized. With flashlights cutting through the dark, officers made their way through the abandoned campground. Overgrown and long forgotten, it was a place Pastor Miles had once taken youth groups for retreats years ago. Near the fire pit, beneath a collapsed picnic table, a cadaver dog suddenly howled. The digging began, and by dawn, the bones of what appeared to be a human body began to surface. Angela Woods may have finally been found. The affair, the threats, and the plan the body buried at the abandoned campground was confirmed by dental records 3 days later. Angela Woods had finally been found. Her remains, partially burned and hastily buried beneath a layer of charred earth, told a horrifying story. She had been struck in the head, likely with a blunt object, then wrapped in an old church curtain and dumped like trash in a place meant for prayer and youth retreats. But it wasn't just the discovery that broke the case wide open. It was what Angela was buried with. Folded inside the fabric, sealed in a Ziploc bag, was a flash drive. What was on that drive would shake the investigation to its core. Angela's final recordings, the flash drive, contained 6 voice memos, all recorded over the 2 weeks leading up to Angela's death. She must have known her life was in danger. Each file was dated and labeled clearly, like breadcrumbs for someone to follow if she went missing. Her voice trembled in the first few recordings. "I keep thinking I'm being followed. He says I'm imagining things, but last night he parked outside my house and didn't come in. Just sat there, watching." The second was angrier. "He told me if I told Brian, or the church board, that everything would fall apart. That people wouldn't believe me, that I would be the sinner, the adulteress, the whore." In another, her voice breaks entirely. "He said he'd ruin me, that no one would ever look at me the same way. He said if I spoke, it would be the last thing I ever did." The final file was the most chilling. "This is for the police, or whoever finds me. If I'm gone, if something's happened to me, it was Pastor Miles. We were having an affair. He wouldn't let me leave. I was going to tell his wife, and now he says I can't be trusted. He scares me. Please, don't let him get away with this." Detectives now had a motive. They had opportunity, and now they had intent. But what they didn't yet know was how far Pastor Miles was willing to go to keep his secrets buried, or who else he'd dragged into his deadly scheme. The confession letter. Who was the accomplice? The anonymous confession note, found just days before Angela's body was recovered, became a priority for investigators. The letter had been written by hand, carefully, but with uneven pressure. A forensic linguist noted the phrasing appeared feminine, and the use of religious phrases like "she would destroy the ministry" and "he said she was dangerous" suggested someone deeply embedded in the church's internal culture. They suspected someone inside Shepherd's Grace Church. Detectives quietly began looking at Pastor Miles's inner circle. There were a few key names. Linda Spaulding, 53, longtime church secretary and confidant of Miles Derek Collins, youth minister and Miles's former mentee Sarah Miles, the pastor's own wife, a deeply private woman who had suddenly stopped attending church weeks before Angela's disappearance. But one name stood out more than any other. Linda. She was one of the few people with keys to the church. Her house was only 4 blocks from where Angela's SUV had been found. And when detectives pulled her phone records, a troubling pattern emerged. A 21-minute call with Pastor Miles at 10:42 p.m. the night Angela disappeared. She told police it was a normal check-in. But her story quickly crumbled. The interrogation went. Brought in for questioning, Linda was defiant at first, insisting she knew nothing, that the letter wasn't hers, and that she loved Angela like a daughter. But when shown the handwriting comparison, her own church notes versus the anonymous letter, her hands began to shake. And then came the photo.a. Single surveillance still from a traffic camera, timestamp 12:02 a.m., the night Angela vanished, showed Linda's gray SUV turning onto Route 27, heading toward the abandoned campground. Her voice cracked, and then, quietly, she said, "I didn't know she was dead." The shocking admission in a full recorded statement. Linda Spaulding confessed to helping Pastor Miles cover up the crime. She claimed Miles had called her in a panic, saying Angela had fallen and hit her head during a heated argument. He begged her to help him protect the ministry. At first, she thought he meant covering up an accident. But by the time she arrived, Angela's body was already wrapped in the church curtain. She admitted to driving the body in her SUV to the abandoned campground, while Miles followed behind in Angela's car. She helped him bury the body. He torched the SUV to make it look like she'd been abducted. "I thought I was doing the right thing," she told detectives, sobbing. "I thought we were protecting the church." She had kept the flash drive Angela left behind, intending to destroy it, but couldn't bring herself to do it. It was like she was still speaking from the grave, she whispered. The secret nobody wanted to hear word of Linda's confession swept through Knoxville like wildfire. Church members were furious, devastated, betrayed. She taught Sunday school with Angela, one congregant said, shaking her head. And then, she helped dump her body like trash. The case now had two major players behind bars. Prosecutors announced Linda would be charged with accessory after the fact to murder, tampering with evidence, and abuse of a corpse. In exchange for her full cooperation, including testifying against Miles, she would not face a murder charge herself. But behind all the headlines, another story was beginning to unfold, because as investigators dug deeper into Pastor Miles's personal life, they uncovered a pattern, one that went back over a decade, stretching across 3 states. There were other women, other affairs, and at least one more woman who had vanished. The Georgia case reopened in 2014, while Pastor Miles was serving at a church in rural Georgia. A young woman named Cassandra Bell went missing. She had recently converted, was attending private spiritual counseling sessions with Miles, and had told friends she believed God had sent her to help the pastor with his burdens. Her body was never found. At the time, her case received little attention. It was assumed she'd run away. She had no close family and a history of depression. But now, detectives from Georgia and Tennessee were coordinating. New witnesses emerged. New connections were being made. One woman said she remembered seeing Cassandra in the company of a married preacher with kind eyes. Another remembered her saying, "If I tell the truth, it'll destroy everything." Police quietly began reinvestigating the Cassandra Bell case, with Pastor Miles as their prime suspect. The courtroom awaits back in Knoxville. Pastor Gregory Miles was indicted by a grand jury for first-degree murder conspiracy to commit murder, obstruction of justice, abuse of a corpse, coercion through spiritual authority. Angela's voice memos would be a key part of the prosecution's case. Linda Spalding was expected to testify, and now, detectives were racing against the clock to determine if Angela Woods was just one of several victims in a pattern of spiritual abuse, manipulation, and cold-blooded murder. On the eve of the trial, Sarah Miles, Pastor Miles's wife, finally broke her silence. Sitting down for an exclusive interview, she looked directly into the camera. "He told me years ago," she said, her voice flat. "He said if I ever left him, I'd end up like the others." She paused. "I just didn't know how many others there were." The trial of Pastor Gregory Miles. It was the trial that tore a small Tennessee town in two. On one side sat the family of Angela Woods, grieving, steadfast, and quietly determined to see justice done for the woman they'd lost. On the other side, a thinning group of remaining loyalists, mostly older churchgoers, who believed Pastor Gregory Miles had been tempted by evil, but was no murderer. And in the middle, inside a packed Knox County courtroom, stood the man who had once delivered sermons on forgiveness, salvation, and purity. Now he stood accused of murder, spiritual abuse, and orchestrating a cover-up involving one of his most trusted allies. From the first gavel to the final gasp, the state of Tennessee versus Gregory Miles was a courtroom spectacle like no other. Opening statements. 2 different realities. Prosecutor Andrea Mills didn't waste time with pleasantries. She opened her case with 6 words. He used God to get away with murder. She told jurors that Pastor Miles had manipulated Angela Woods into an illicit, emotionally abusive affair, then killed her when she threatened to expose him. She painted him as a man who disguised his predation as pastoral care, and said Angela's voice memos were the clearest cry for help we've ever heard from beyond the grave. Mills told the jury they'd hear from forensic experts, from Angela's friends, and, most importantly, from Linda Spalding, the woman who helped dispose of Angela's body. The defense took a very different approach. Lead attorney Marcus Klein insisted there was no hard proof Miles committed murder. He called the state's evidence speculative, the voice recordings emotional but not factual, and the witness testimony tainted by grief and hysteria. Then, in a risky move, he told the jury, Pastor Miles admits to the affair. He admits to moral failure. But he did not kill Angela Woods. It was a stunning admission, but one designed to separate immorality from criminality. The evidence mounts. The prosecution began with a methodical, brutal unpacking of the crime scene. Blood spatter experts confirmed Angela was killed by blunt force trauma, likely with a broken hymnal stand found hidden behind the baptismal font. Chemical analysis proved the lighter fluid found at the SUV scene matched the exact brand purchased by Miles the night of her disappearance. That Angela's flash drive recordings were played in full, drawing gasps from jurors and tears from the gallery. But the most damaging evidence was yet to come, the star witness, Linda Spaulding. When Linda took the stand, she looked smaller than anyone remembered, shoulders curled in, voice quiet, her church attire replaced by a prison-issued blouse. But her testimony was explosive. She detailed the moment Miles called her the night of the murder, how she found Angela's lifeless body wrapped in church linens, how they transported it to the abandoned campground, and how Miles burned Angela's car while she stood by. He told me if I ever told anyone, God would judge me, she said through tears. He said the devil had taken Angela, and that if we didn't protect the church, it would fall apart. On cross-examination, the defense tried to poke holes in her story. Isn't it true, Klein asked, that you were in love with Pastor Miles? Linda didn't hesitate. I thought I was, until I realized he didn't love anyone, not even God. Angela's sister speaks. Next came Monica Woods, Angela's younger sister. She read aloud the final text Angela had sent her the night she disappeared. If anything happens to me, promise me you won't believe I just left. It wasn't evidence in the legal sense. It couldn't be cross-examined, and it wasn't part of the original police report, but it was a gut punch for jurors. And when she described watching Angela become more withdrawn over the last few months, attending more private meetings with Miles, abandoning her therapy, and telling her the church is the only place that understands me, the psychological manipulation became crystal clear. The defense's case, a desperate gamble. By the time the defense began its case, the damage had been done. Jurors had seen video footage, heard the flash drive recordings, and watched a close ally of the defendant cry on the stand as she admitted to burying a body. Still, Klein attempted to redirect the narrative. He pointed out there was no DNA from Pastor Miles on Angela's body, that he noted the murder weapon had only partial prints. He claimed Linda Spaulding was more involved than she admitted, and may have acted alone or with another accomplice. He suggested Angela's death may have been an accident, a fall, perhaps, and that Miles had only panicked after discovering her. And then, in a shocking move, he put Pastor Gregory Miles on the stand. Pastor Miles testifies. Miles walked to the stand slowly, hands folded in front of him, wearing a gray suit and his wedding band. He addressed the jury like they were his congregation. He admitted to the affair. It was wrong. I betrayed my vows to my wife, to my church, to God. But I never hurt Angela. He claimed Angela had grown emotionally unstable in the final weeks, that she had threatened suicide, and that he feared for her safety. He said he found her dead in the church and didn't know what to do. I should have called the police, he said. I know that now, but I was scared. Scared of what it would do to my family, my ministry, my life. But the prosecution pounced. You were scared of the truth. Andrea Mills barked in cross. Scared that everyone would finally see who you really are. That beneath the suit and the sermons, you're a predator and a killer. Miles remained calm, but jurors noted a shift in his eyes. The calm confidence gave way to something colder, rehearsed, mechanical. Closing arguments and jury deliberation. Prosecutor Mills stood before the jury one last time. He had the motive to silence her. He had the means, the church, the access, the trust, and he had the opportunity. Every piece of this crime points to one man who thought he was too holy to be caught. The defense, exhausted and clearly outmatched, leaned on doubt. This is a tragedy, yes. But tragedy is not the same as murder. Don't convict a man because you don't like what he did in the dark. Convict him only if you believe he caused Angela Woods' death, intentionally and without doubt. Jurors deliberated for 3 full days. And then, on the morning of October 16, 2024, the verdict was read. The verdict guilty on all counts that first-degree murder, abuse of a corpse, tampering with evidence, conspiracy to commit murder, coercion through spiritual authority. Gregory Miles's face remained unreadable. Not a flinch, not a tear, just a faint nod, like he had finally accepted his fate. Sentencing was scheduled for the following month. Outside the courtroom, Angela's mother clutched a photo of her daughter. Reporters asked if justice had been served. "We'll never get Angela back," she said. "But now he can't hurt anyone else." As the courtroom emptied and reporters filed their final updates, a young detective handed the prosecutor a manila envelope. Inside were photographs, time-stamped, dated 2014, taken in Georgia. Each one featured Pastor Miles at a wooded campsite, the same location where Cassandra Bell vanished over a decade ago. Angela Woods may not have been his first victim, and the state of Georgia was about to open a brand new murder investigation. The secret victims, a trail of broken lives, even as Pastor Gregory Miles sat behind bars awaiting sentencing for the murder of Angela Woods. The shadows of his past began creeping into the present. When a man falls from grace, it often exposes the fractures beneath the surface. But when that man is a pastor, beloved, trusted, idolized, the cracks aren't just personal, they're systemic. And in the case of Gregory Miles, those cracks were decades deep, spanning 3 states, multiple congregations, and a growing number of broken women who had stayed silent. Until now, the Georgia files reopened. The first seismic shift came from Haralson County, Georgia, where Pastor Miles had led a small but devout congregation from 2012 to 2015. Among the missing persons reports filed during his tenure was Cassandra Bell, a 27-year-old Sunday school volunteer who vanished in March 2014 without a trace. At the time, Cassandra's disappearance was barely a blip on the radar. She had no close family, just an elderly aunt in Virginia who couldn't travel, and no significant social media presence. Police treated it as a likely voluntary disappearance. But after Miles's conviction in Tennessee, a tip arrived at the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. The anonymous caller claimed Cassandra had been involved with Pastor Miles and that something bad happened after she threatened to report him to the church board. Detectives, now collaborating across state lines, reopened the cold case. And this time, they had names, leads, and evidence. The photos that changed everything. Those photographs, unearthed during a sweep of Miles's old church office in Knoxville, were time-stamped from a summer retreat in Georgia, dated July 12, 2013. They depicted a rustic, wooded campsite run by a local Christian group. In 3 of the photos, Miles could be seen with Cassandra, sometimes side by side, sometimes in quiet conversation. In one, her hand rested gently on his shoulder as they sat near a fire pit. It wasn't the kind of casual photo church members typically took. It had intimacy, a weight, a secret. Even more disturbing, that same campsite had been where Cassandra's last cell phone signal pinged before it went dark forever. Investigators from Georgia obtained a search warrant for the property and began digging. What they found left no doubt. The second body on April 2, 2025. Under a layer of rocks behind an abandoned cabin at the retreat grounds, authorities discovered skeletal remains, wrapped in a tattered sleeping bag and duct tape. Nearby, a half-buried cross necklace, a driver's license, and a bracelet engraved with the name Cassie. Dental records and DNA would later confirm it. Cassandra Bell had been found 11 years after she vanished. Her skull showed signs of blunt force trauma, eerily similar to the injuries found on Angela Woods. It was the moment prosecutors feared, and the moment survivors had waited for. The women speak in the weeks that followed the discovery. 5 women came forward, each with chillingly similar stories. Emily Garrison, 33, from Georgia, said Miles had mentored her after a divorce. Their spiritual counseling sessions quickly became sexual, and when she tried to pull away, he threatened to tell her family she had seduced her pastor. Melinda Thompson, 41, said she was warned by another female staff member to avoid being alone with Miles. She never told anyone until now, fearing no one would believe her. Rachel Kim, 29, a church intern from Miles's early years in Mississippi, said she was groomed over 2 years. She described gifts, praise, then emotional manipulation. He said God told him we were connected. She whispered in a recorded interview. Two other women asked to remain anonymous, but gave sworn statements to law enforcement. One said Miles used the Bible like a weapon, twisting scripture to justify their encounters. None of these women had spoken before, but with the Georgia body now linked to Miles and 2 murders being investigated, they finally felt safe enough to come forward. The pattern emerges. Investigators, journalists, and victim advocates began piecing together a disturbing timeline. 2007, 2010, Mississippi, multiple mentorship roles. 1 confirmed inappropriate relationship. 2010, 2015, Georgia, Cassandra Bell disappears. Affair allegations. 2015, 2024, Tennessee, Angela Woods murdered. Linda Spalding coerced into covering it up. Everywhere Miles went, women reported the same behaviors. Charismatic approachability, private, spiritual counseling, emotional dependency, escalating intimacy, threats of divine punishment or social ruin. If they spoke out, it wasn't just abuse. It was religiously cloaked predation. He didn't just exploit trust, he engineered it. Federal investigation launched with 2 confirmed murders, multiple abuse allegations across state lines, and at least 3 states involved, the FBI announced. It would launch a federal investigation into Gregory Miles under the Violence Against Women Act and interstate sexual exploitation statutes. Federal agents raided Miles's old storage unit in Mississippi and seized computers, photos, and journals. Early leaks from the investigation suggested some items dated back to 2005 and included handwritten reflections that detailed sinful temptations involving unnamed women in his congregation. 1 entry read, "I prayed, but the devil persists. Her perfume invades the chapel like smoke. If she tempts me again, I will have to remove the cause." Angela's voice sparks a movement back in Tennessee. Angela Woods's recordings began spreading beyond the courtroom. Clips were featured on national true crime podcasts, advocacy groups, and survivor support networks. Her trembling voice, frightened, firm, and prophetic, became a rallying cry for women in faith communities across the country. Churches began quietly reviewing their counseling policies. Some congregations introduced third-person rule requirements, while others began pushing for legislation requiring pastors and spiritual leaders to report sexual misconduct. Angela, in death, was sparking a reckoning. Cassandra's aunt, you ignored her. At a press conference in Georgia, Dorothy Bell, Cassandra's aunt, addressed reporters. "I told the sheriff's office in 2014 that she was scared of someone at her church, that someone was hurting her spirit. They said she probably ran off with a boyfriend. They ignored her." She paused, holding a small locket with Cassandra's photo inside. Maybe if someone had listened, Angela would still be alive. Miles faces new charges on May 6, 2025, just days before his Tennessee sentencing. A grand jury in Georgia indicted Gregory Miles on first-degree murder in the death of Cassandra Bell. He now faced 2 life sentences, 1 in Tennessee, 1 in Georgia, and a possible federal trial still to come. His legal team filed motions to delay sentencing, citing overwhelming media bias and psychological instability. But the motions were denied. A newly uncovered letter, hidden in a notebook from 2009, was leaked by an anonymous law enforcement source. It was addressed to "My sweetest light." The contents suggested a third woman, never before named, and the closing line read, "If you betray me like the others, I'll silence your voice forever too." That woman has never been identified, and investigators believe there may be one more body out there, waiting to be found. Sentencing day, and the secret that still haunts the church. May 12, 2025. The courtroom was silent, eerily so, after months of public outrage. 2 murder investigations, 5 abuse survivors stepping forward, and one of the most shocking clergy scandals in recent U.S. history. The man at the center of it all, Pastor Gregory Miles, was finally about to be sentenced. The pews of the Knox County Courthouse were full, and the hallways buzzed with cameras, activists, and reporters. But inside the courtroom, not a phone rang, not a cough escaped. Only the steady ticking of the wall clock reminded everyone that time was moving forward. Even if the town felt frozen at the defense table, Miles sat in an orange jumpsuit. The first time he appeared in court without a tie or a Bible in his hands, he didn't look up once. Victim impact statements. The final words of the women before Judge Renata Carlisle delivered her sentence. The court heard from the women Miles had silenced for years, some in death, others through fear. Monica Woods, Angela's sister, stepped to the podium first. Her voice was calm, but laced with fury. "You taught my sister to trust you. You told her God spoke through you. But you weren't a prophet. You were a predator. And now she's gone because she saw the truth and tried to break free." Next came Dorothy Bell, aunt of Cassandra, who had flown in from Virginia for the hearing. "She called you Pastor Greg. She thought you were helping her heal after her mom passed. You buried her in a sleeping bag like she was trash. I hope you hear her name in your head every night for the rest of your life. Cassandra, Cassandra, Cassandra." Then Emily Garrison stood, shaking but determined. "I didn't come here today as a victim. I came here as a survivor. And I want you to know, you don't own my story anymore." Gasps and quiet sobs rippled through the crowd as each woman spoke. One by one, they reclaimed their voices. The sentencing Judge Carlisle was known for being reserved, measured, professional, rarely emotional. But as she read through her notes, her voice trembled slightly. "This court has witnessed a level of spiritual manipulation that borders on ritualistic cruelty. You used your position, your influence, and people's faith to isolate, exploit, and ultimately destroy the lives of women who trusted you." She paused, then added, "Gregory Miles, you are a disgrace to your calling. And more than that, you are a danger to any community, any congregation, and any woman who has the misfortune of encountering you." Then came the sentence. Life in prison without the possibility of parole for the murder of Angela Woods. A concurrent sentence of life imprisonment to be served following extradition to Georgia for the murder of Cassandra Bell. An additional 40 years for abuse of a corpse, conspiracy, and coercion through religious authority. She ended with one final statement. "You used to preach about hell. Now you're going to live in one." The church reacts and fractures after the trial. First Calvary Revival Church officially closed its doors. The congregation, once more than 700 strong, had dwindled to fewer than 60. Most of the leadership board resigned. Some fled town entirely. Others tried to hold prayer circles in private homes, but the name Gregory Miles had poisoned the ministry beyond repair. Survivors of the abuse began organizing an online coalition known as Sacred Truth, advocating for reforms in church accountability, background checks, and mandatory external oversight of clergy members. Donations poured in, and churches across the South began quietly reassessing their pastoral structures. The federal case looms, though sentenced in Tennessee and soon to be transferred to Georgia. Gregory Miles wasn't finished in the courts. The FBI's federal case was still active. Digital forensics from his Mississippi storage unit revealed a hidden drive encrypted with biblical verse patterns as passwords. When decrypted, it contained dozens of journal entries about women he called tests from the Lord, private emails with young female interns, unsent letters addressed to unnamed women, and most disturbingly, a folder titled Exodus 13 containing photos of a third woman no one could yet identify who was my sweetest light. The final mystery that still haunts investigators is the woman referenced in the letter discovered in his 2009 notebook, the one he called my sweetest light. Despite weeks of investigation, no woman has yet come forward, and no match has been made. But an odd discovery near the Georgia crime scene may hold the answer. During a final sweep of the retreat grounds, detectives unearthed a lockbox nailed inside a hollowed-out tree stump, covered in years of debris and moss. Inside were a silver locket, a small King James Bible, water-damaged and singed, a photograph of a young woman, mid-20s, smiling on a lake dock, and a note that read, "She knew me before I was chosen, before the call, before I learned to make them disappear." The woman's identity remains unknown, but the FBI now believes Gregory Miles may have killed before his ministry ever began. Epilogue: a legacy of silence shattered. Angela Woods, Cassandra Bell, and a third woman still waiting for her name to be spoken. The story of Pastor Gregory Miles isn't just one of murder. It's a story about how power can be sanctified, about the danger of unchecked spiritual authority, and about the invisible scars left behind when predators wrap themselves in robes of righteousness. But through the pain, Something Changed. Angela's recordings sparked a national movement. Cassandra's rediscovery revived long-forgotten cases. And the women who once whispered in shame now speak loudly. On stages, on podcasts, in courtrooms. The final words of Angela's last recording say it best. If you're hearing this, then I didn't make it. But maybe someone else will. Maybe. The next girl won't fall for his prayers. And maybe, just maybe, we'll all learn to look closer at the men we trust the most.
What did you think of the case? Please share your thoughts in the comment below. If you want more video like this, please be sure to like the video, subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on more true crime videos. See you in the next one.